Good afternoon. Welcome back to another Marvel Champions video. And today we'll be providing custom rules for the Sinister Motives campaign in order to make the campaign more playable, especially on expert difficulty. The reason this is necessary is because, like the Galaxy's Most Wanted campaign, the campaign for Sinister Motives increases the difficulty. And this is not needed, nor do I think is it generally wanted by players for the campaign to increase the difficulty significantly, because playing in campaign mode is already has a built-in downside, and that downside is that you can't switch heroes between scenarios. Ideally, playing 5 different scenarios that present different challenges, we would like to change heroes in each scenario in order to use heroes that are best adapted to the challenges that are presented to us. But in the campaign mode, you can't do that. You have to play the same hero all the way through, and that's a significant downside. And hopefully the campaign bonus cards provide an upside to compensate for that downside. Providing additional challenge in the campaign mode is not needed and makes the campaign, in my opinion, unplayable in solo mode. And I don't know about multiplayer mode, but in solo mode I consider the campaign unplayable. So we'll go over why that is and what changes can be made in order to make it more playable. So let's take a look at the campaign setup instructions. For scenario 1, we are instructed to put Public Outcry into play. In standard mode, use the side with the text standard mode. In expert mode, use expert mode. Then we also need Smear Campaign and a Community Service side scheme at random. Well, here's Public Outcry. It has 2 notoriety counters and provides 1 acceleration token. In standard difficulty, that's not that bad. I don't think that the boost icon is needed. The acceleration token is needed because it does take quite a while to remove Public Outcry. And providing a built-in extra acceleration token is a significant downside for a lot of heroes, because not every hero is particularly good at thwarting, and if you're playing in solo, this is a severe limitation on the number of heroes that you can play against this campaign, even on standard difficulty. So let's just ignore the acceleration token for our standard rules, and certainly for the expert rules, which provides 3 notoriety tokens. They get removed when you defeat a minion or a side scheme. But an extra encounter card in solo is an insane level of difficulty to provide for our campaign. Public Outcry is used in every single scenario in this campaign, and to demand that players on expert play with an additional encounter card until they can clear 3 side schemes or minions, that increases the difficulty from expert to heroic 1. If we were playing this scenario not in campaign mode, this is how we would play it. And if we wanted to increase to heroic 1 difficulty, then we would add 1 additional encounter card, which means that if you're playing expert campaign mode for as long as Public Outcry is on the table, you're playing on heroic 1 difficulty. That's crazy for a campaign that's labeled expert difficulty. So we just remove this encounter card boost icon for a custom campaign. It's not needed, it's not wanted. And then that means Public Outcry, if it's defeated, it provides 1 victory point for the reputation track, but that's its only purpose in the game, is to keep score, basically, over how you're doing. Then we have Smear Campaign. That's fine. We'll use Smear Campaign. It adds notoriety counters, makes it more difficult for us to get that victory point for the reputation track. That's fine. And the side schemes do the same. These don't have any downside, so we don't mind using them. They're just there as a way to keep score, basically. So we got no problem with using that. However, there is 1 additional requirement, which we do have a problem with. Expert Campaign only. Place 2 additional sand counters on the city streets environment. Resolve its Surging Sands ability. Well, we already start with 4 on the city streets environment. That's the requirement. If we place 2 more and then resolve Surging Sands, which is to place 1 more or discarding 7 cards from the top of the encounter deck. Then Sandman's Phase 2, when revealed, resolves Surging Sands again. That starts with 8 sand counters on the City Streets environment and 15 encounter cards in the discard pile. To remove those sand counters, you exhaust a character you control. Remove sand counters from here equal to that character's attack once per round per player. That means in solo mode you can really only remove 2 sand counters per round. They're talking about 4 rounds of using an action in order to clear these sand counters, and that's if no more sand counters come into play. But they will, because when Sandman attacks, he deals indirect damage, and if your identity takes any damage, you resolve Surging Sands. So you can't start with 8 sand counters in solo play. The interesting thing about this is that it doesn't scale up and down for the number of players. You start with 8 sand counters on there whether you're playing with 4 players or with 1. And obviously it'll be much easier to remove these sand counters with 4 players because you get to use the hero action once per round per player. It needs to scale up or down in order to be balanced for solo play. There's no way around that. You can't have it be 8 whether you're playing with 4 players or with 1 player. That's just crazy. Because you'll make this extremely difficult for a solo player relative to a multiplayer game. The same is true for the Public Outcry additional card. It's not 1 additional card per player, it's just 1 additional card. So when you've got a 4-player game, you've got 4 encounter cards already. Adding 1 more is not great, but it's only 25% of the way to Heroic 1 difficulty. If you're playing solo mode, though, adding 1 encounter card doubles your encounter cards. These two things not scaling up or down for solo versus multiplayer means this scenario, this campaign box was designed for multiplayer. And solo play was an afterthought if they gave it any thought at all, and I don't believe they did, because my opinion is that this campaign is unplayable in solo. So the balance changes that we make, we simply ignore this extra encounter card icon for solo play, and in addition, we ignore this campaign instruction of placing 2 additional sand counters. It's not needed, and that level of difficulty is not wanted for an expert campaign, in my opinion. It may be appropriate for a difficulty beyond expert, and if it had been labeled as such, that would probably be fine. If they had like an expert and then these campaign instructions applied to a difficulty beyond expert that was like future-proofing the campaign for when new and more powerful cards come out, that would be fine. But that's not the case, and so for the expert campaign, we play on expert difficulty, but we ignore the additional encounter card and we ignore this campaign instruction. So let's move on and talk about Venom. The Venom instructions say put the Public Outcry environment into play. So once again, we will do that, but we will ignore the extra encounter card icon. Shuffle the Smear Campaign Treachery into the deck, that's fine. Shuffle a random side scheme into the deck, that's fine. Set each player's hit point dial to the remaining hit point value from the campaign log, that's fine. Each player may deal himself 1 face-down encounter card from the encounter deck to set their hit point dial to their identity's printed hit point value, so you can take an extra encounter card in order to heal. No, I don't agree with that. I think that's too big a penalty. The way I would play it instead, the custom rule is remove 1 reputation from your reputation total to heal your hit point value. So let's talk about the reputation track now. The reputation track is a way to gain your campaign bonus cards. In the past, that was like a victory point money pool or something similar. I agree. I like the idea of gaining reputation based on the number of conditions that you fulfilled. I don't like the idea of gaining penalties. So for my custom rules, we simply ignore the right side of the reputation track. We take the bonuses, we don't take any of the downsides. They're not needed. We can look at the downsides. If you get 1 reputation, so this is how you get reputation. +1 for each victory point, +1 for no minions in play, +1 for no side schemes, +1 for no threat on the main scheme, +1 for fewer than 1 acceleration tokens, +1 for no defeated identity. In my experience, playing the custom rules, you get roughly 3 reputation per scenario. For the first benefit, with 1 reputation, you get to deal 3 shield tech upgrades at random and choose 1 to add to your deck. This is a mild benefit. I don't really think that the upgrades are that good, generally. But it's an acceptable benefit to offset the difficulty of only getting to play 1 hero through the whole campaign. It's not, we don't need the downsides. These upgrades are not so imbalanced that they warrant downsides, in my opinion. These upgrades that we get, the bonuses, simply compensate for the inherent downside of a campaign, which is only being able to play 1 hero. So for the custom rules, we simply ignore the right side of the reputation track. We don't do the add 1 Osborne tech upgrade. We don't do place 1 threat per player on the main scheme. We don't do search the encounter deck and discard pile for a minion. That's crazy. Not needed. Don't need an additional Osborne tech upgrade. Don't need to add a side scheme. That's crazy too. And 1 threat per player on that side scheme. This is a difficulty level beyond Heroic 1, in my opinion, is what they want you to do for the Expert campaign. It's not quite as difficult as Galaxy's Most Wanted, but it's in the same ballpark, and it's bizarre in context because Rise of the Red Skull and Mad Titan's Shadow were both perfectly fine out of the box, no changes needed. They were well balanced, in my opinion. It's almost like they had 2 separate teams developing campaign boxes, one that designed Rise of the Red Skull and Mad Titan's Shadow, and one that designed Galaxy's Most Wanted and Sinister Motives, and they were alternating between the 2 teams for their release schedule. And the 2 teams had different design philosophies for what the campaign should be. That's the way it seems to me. I don't know if that's the case or not. And we also don't do the 1 additional encounter card to each player, etc. So we take the bonuses, we don't take the downsides. That's the custom rule for the reputation track. And then for scenario 2, when we would deal ourselves 1 face down encounter card to heal, no. Instead, if you want to heal your hero up to full, simply subtract 1 from your reputation total. And for the Expert campaign, there's also 1 face down boost card for each identity. No, we don't need that. Don't need the additional difficulties. The campaign balance is just fine as it is. If you simply play through the campaign with the campaign bonus cards and you're playing against the bosses on Expert difficulty, that's all the challenge that's needed. Even with removing these extra challenges, it's still an extremely challenging campaign on Expert difficulty. Very, very difficult. So let's move on to scenario number 3. For the campaign instructions, we have put the Venom ally into play under the first player's control. Let's take a look at the Venom ally. I agree with incorporating him into the campaign. I think that's fun and thematic. I don't agree with him starting out in play, because I don't think that's necessarily designed to help the player. He adds an additional encounter card. This is debatable. You could start out with Venom in play, but my decision for the custom rules is that he should start out in the deck. And when you draw him, you have the choice of whether you want to play him or not. I think that Venom on average provides more difficulty than benefit. It's close. If you can make use of him very quickly, it's close, but I think if you actually start with him in play, you may just want to use him to take an attack on the first round so that he dies and you don't have to take any encounter cards. I guess you could play it that way. But I think it's more fun to start out with him in the deck. That's my opinion on it. So for that campaign instruction, we simply start with Venom in the deck, but we don't start with him in play. For the other instructions, we once again put Public Outcry into play, but we ignore the boost encounter card. We shuffle the Smear campaign and Snitches get Stitches and attachments into the encounter deck. That's fine. Random side scheme, that's fine. Follow the setup instructions for the reputation track. Once again, ignoring the right side of the reputation track. Expert campaign, you can heal by dealing yourself 2 face down encounter cards. No, that's crazy. Once again, if you want to heal, just subtract 1 from your reputation total per player who wants to heal. Expert campaign in player order, each player must shuffle the top 2 cards of the encounter deck into their deck. No, we don't need that. It is not needed. That is a level of difficulty that is not needed in order for this to be challenging. At the end, count the total number of illusion cards in all player decks. Record that number in the Waking Nightmare section. That comes back for extra threat. That's fine. That's fine. It doesn't really affect that much. So I have no issue with that. For the Sinister 6, put the Venom Ally card into play under the first player's control. Once again, let's start with it in the deck instead. Put the Public Outcry environment into play, yes, but ignore the boost icon or the extra card icon. Shuffle the Smear campaign and Snitches Get Stitches into the encounter deck, that's fine. A Community Service side scheme, that's fine. Place threat on the light at the end scheme equal to the number recorded in the Waking Nightmare section, that's fine. Expert campaign, deal 2 face down encounter cards to heal, no. Just subtract 1 from the reputation track instead. If a campaign side scheme is, so in the last one, standing section, record the name of each villain in play. That's fine. So let's move on to scenario 5. And once again, I'll put all of these custom rules in the video description down below. For Venom Goblin, put the Public Outcry environment into play. That's fine, but once again we ignore. Actually, scratch that, what I said. We don't need Public Outcry for scenario 5. Its purpose in our custom campaign is to keep score for victory points. We don't need that against Venom Goblin because it's the last scenario, so we can't get any additional campaign bonuses. Therefore, Public Outcry is not necessary, and neither is Smear Campaign, as its only purpose is to add notoriety counters to Public Outcry. Search the Sinister, so we scratch these first 2. Requirements: search the Sinister Assault modular set for each minion with the same name as a villain's last name, and shuffle each of those minions into the encounter deck. That's fine. Set each player's hit point dial to the remaining hit point, but healing by dealing 3 encounter cards, that is absolutely crazy. Absolutely bonkers. If you were playing a expert campaign with 4 players and you started with the 2 on reveal, the win revealed cards, the 2 encounter cards that you get from the win revealed effect of Venom Goblin in phase 2 plus each player healed, you'd be starting with 14 encounter cards. And these are high difficulty encounter cards. That's a level of difficulty far beyond Heroic 1. That's absurd. Don't do that. Just subtract 1 from your reputation total if you want to heal. Place 1 additional threat per player on each main scheme. No, we don't need that. If the players lose the game, Venom Goblin takes control of New York City and the players lose the campaign. No, you don't need that. Now, if you want to play with Public Outcry in order to just kind of keep score, that's fine. But it isn't really needed, in my opinion. Then we need additional balance changes to make Venom Goblin actually playable. And this is the change that I would make to Venom Goblin. As it's designed, you add 1 threat to each of these scenarios per round for phase 1, and then when Venom Goblin activates, you move the glider counter to the main scheme with the least threat, and then you resolve its special ability. We're not going to do that as designed. Instead, what we do is at the beginning of the villain phase, you activate the scheme with the least threat, and then you only add threat to that scheme. So it's 1 threat per round instead of 3, and then you activate that special. That's the first change. Then the second change is we modify this when revealed effect from deal 2 face down encounter cards to each player to deal 1 face down encounter card for each player. And in phase 3, we modify this from deal 3 face down encounter cards to each player to deal 1 face down encounter card to each player. And if you make those changes, then Venom Goblin becomes playable, but still really difficult. So these are the changes that are needed in order to make the Expert campaign difficult. And if you make these changes, you'll find it beatable, but extremely difficult. Same as the changes that I recommended for Galaxy's Most Wanted. If you make the changes that I recommended for Galaxy's Most Wanted, you'll find it difficult, but beatable. If you don't make these changes, in my opinion, this campaign is unplayable on Expert, and it wasn't designed for Expert. In my opinion, it was designed for multiplayer. It doesn't scale up or down well. So I think they designed it with 4 players in mind and gave no thought at all to solo play. That's my opinion on it. They figured you wouldn't want to play the campaign on solo play, or I don't know. I don't know what they were thinking, but it's broken on solo, and so this is how I would fix it. And even with these fixes, it's only going to be beatable by a very small number of heroes, but it is beatable. And as it was designed, it is not beatable in solo play. So those are the changes that I would make in order to fix the Sinister Motives campaign for solo play. And if you have your own house rules, I would love to hear about them. If you have found that they increase the playability of the campaign for Sinister Motives. And thank you for watching.